The lantern swung from a rusted hook, throwing long shadows across the barn walls. Dust hung heavy in the air, each particle glowing gold in the dim light. The girl's wrists were bound, rope fibers cutting deep into her skin. Her breath came shallow, trembling, as her stepfather, drunk and reeking of whiskey, pulled the rope tighter around her neck. His boots scraped against the hay-strewn floor, each step slow, deliberate, cruel. He grinned, yellowed teeth glinting. "You think you can run from me?" he slurred, voice thick with rage. She tried to speak, but the rope stole her voice. Her lips barely moved. "Make it end." The words were no louder than a prayer. The man chuckled, a sound without mercy. He tugged the rope once more, jerking her body upward so her boots barely brushed the dirt. She gagged, legs kicking weakly against empty air. The barn groaned under the weight of her struggle. Narration painted the silence. This was cruelty stripped bare, a life dangling between one man's thirst for power and a young woman's fading hope. Her eyes searched the rafters, the hayloft, anywhere for escape, but there was none. Her face flushed red, vision swimming, the world closing in with every choking gasp. "Stop fighting," the outlaw sneered, spitting tobacco on the floor.
"Ain't nobody coming for you."
"You're mine. Always will be." Her body sagged, the fight slipping away. Tears streaked down her cheeks, mixing with dust and sweat. Somewhere beyond the barn door, the desert wind howled, a lonesome hymn, as if the earth itself mourned her suffering. Her mind drifted. Childhood memories flickered, sunlight on open fields, laughter before the darkness. Then the rope pulled her back to the present, brutal, merciless, final. The lantern's flame flickered low, casting her shadow across the planks. She whispered again, weaker this time, almost gone. "Make it end." The outlaw gave the rope one last tug, then staggered back, convinced she'd soon be nothing but silence in the rafters. He turned toward the door, boots crunching in hay, muttering, "Good riddance." The barn door creaked shut behind him, leaving her alone, suspended, fading, her life hanging by a thread of rough hemp and fragile will, and in that moment, all was still. Only the sound of rope groaning against timber remained, echoing like a death knell in the hollow dark. The barn was silent, but the silence was heavier than any shout. She dangled, wrists raw, rope cutting into her skin like fire. Her lungs screamed for air, chest heaving with desperate gasps. Dust swirled around her, a golden haze that made the edges of the barn blur into nothingness. The outlaw had gone, leaving only the scent of whiskey and fear behind. The girl's legs kicked weakly against the air, hooves of her imagination pounding the empty floor. Her vision swam. Shadows of hayloft beams danced like phantom hands, reaching, pulling. Every heartbeat felt like an eternity. Narration lingered on the moment. Left to die, alone in the darkness, she teetered on the thin line between life and oblivion. And yet, even in that desolation, a flicker of defiance remained, her fingers strained against the rope's cruel weave. The raw fibers bit, drawing tears and blood alike. She gasped again, voice barely a whisper. "Please, someone!" The wind howled through cracks in the barn, carrying her plea into the barren night. Outside, the desert lay vast and indifferent, moonlight spilling over sand and scrub, silent witnesses to her suffering. Her body twisted, the rope creaking and groaning with every tiny movement. Dust fell into her eyes, stinging, blurring the edges of terror and hope. Suddenly, the barn door rattled. A gust of wind shook the old planks. She froze, heart hammering. Could it be someone? Or merely the desert mocking her? Her throat ached from the struggle to speak, but the words caught in her chest, swallowed by fear. She remembered the outlaw's promise. "You're mine." That promise hung in the barn like a curse, each syllable pressing down on her chest, tighter than the rope ever could. Her body trembled, a fragile mix of exhaustion and defiance. As darkness pooled beneath her, she clung to the thought of escape, fleeting and fragile. Every heartbeat, every shallow breath was a silent rebellion. She refused to surrender completely, even if her body begged for it. The rope swayed with her movements, the barn groaning under the weight of inevitability. Her eyes closed for a moment, imagining dawn, imagining hands that might reach her before it was too late. But the night pressed in, thick and unyielding, leaving her alone with the rope, the dust, and the taste of fear, and yet somewhere beyond the barn. The faintest whisper of hope began to stir, a promise that her story was far from over. The first hint of dawn broke over the horizon, pale light stretching across the desert. The barn remained a coffin of shadows, but the air shifted, a faint creak of the door, a stir of life. Outside, a rancher rode slowly along the worn dirt path, lantern swinging from his saddle, boots thudding against stirrups. He had heard rumors of trouble, whispers from the town, and his instincts told him something was wrong. Inside, she hung, swaying, suspended between fear and fading consciousness. Her limbs ached, rope fibers biting deep, but something in her chest tightened. Not surrender, but desperate hope. And then, the lantern's beam cut through the dimness, slicing the darkness like a knife. The rancher's voice, low but firm, broke the silence. "Hold on. I've got you." Her eyes widened through exhaustion, disbelief flickering across them. The outlaw had promised she was alone, but here was a man, steady, strong, moral, a presence that cut through her despair. He stepped into the barn, boots crunching in the straw, hand steady as he took in the scene. In that moment, she was not yet saved, but salvation had arrived. A guardian, shaped by years of hardship and honor, met cruelty with courage, and the balance of fate began to shift. He grabbed the rope, working carefully yet urgently to loosen it, his hands brushing hers with gentle precision. Almost there. "Just hold on," she coughed, eyes stinging from dust and fear, voice barely audible. "Please." "Hurry!" The rancher's jaw tightened. The barn smelled of sweat, hay, and old whiskey. The scent of violence lingered, but he did not falter. Step by step, he freed her from the rope's cruel grip, supporting her as her feet finally touched the floor. She collapsed against him, trembling, chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. Outside, the desert wind swept through the broken barn boards, carrying a faint promise of freedom. Lantern light flickered across her pale, bruised face, casting long shadows that danced like ghosts. The rancher guided her to the open air, steady hands gripping hers. "You're safe now," he said, his voice rough but resolute. "No one's taking you tonight?" She whispered back, fragile yet certain. "Thank you." In the dawn's first light, fear still lingered, but hope had found her. The rope, the barn, the darkness, none of it could claim her now. She had been rescued, but her story, and the shadows chasing her, were far from over. The cabin sat at the edge of the ranch, walls of weathered logs glowing golden in the early morning light. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, carrying the scent of burning pine and safety. He led her inside, each step careful, his hands firm but gentle, cradling her as if she might shatter with a single jolt. She sank onto a chair near the hearth, legs trembling, body bruised and raw. The fire crackled, throwing warm light across her face, highlighting the dark rings beneath her eyes. Dust still clung to her hair and skin, but the air inside smelled of life, not menace. In that small cabin, surrounded by the quiet hum of the waking ranch, she felt something she hadn't in years, a reprieve. Safety was not a promise of tomorrow, but a sanctuary for this fragile moment, and that alone was enough to breathe. He knelt before her, checking the bruises along her wrists, hands brushing gently against her skin. "You're strong," he said quietly. "But you need rest." Her voice was raw, barely above a whisper. I can't believe he—" She faltered, tears breaking free, hands trembling as they clutched the blanket he draped around her shoulders. He let silence speak for a moment, the crackling fire filling the gaps, the distant lowing of cattle outside reminding them both that life continued. Then he said firmly, "He won't touch you again, not here. Not ever." This cabin, with its walls lined in shadow and light, became more than shelter. It became a threshold between fear and hope, between the darkness she fled and the dawn she had yet to claim. She leaned back against the warmth, letting it seep into her bones. The rancher prepared water in a tin cup, brushing away the dust that clung stubbornly to her skin, each small act a wordless promise. "You are not alone. You are seen. You are safe, A quiet conversation unfolded, sparse words, weighted with meaning. "Thank you for coming," she murmured, voice breaking. "You would do the same for anyone in need," he replied, steady, eyes soft but resolute. Outside, the wind carried the scent of hay and earth, a gentle reminder of the world beyond the cabin. Shadows of the past lingered, but inside, the hearth's glow offered a fragile, vital truth. Here, for now, she could simply exist, and in the silence, in the warmth of firelight and human care, hope began to root itself. She was alive, she was seen, and the long, dark night was finally giving way to a promise of morning. The sun dipped low behind the distant mesas, painting the town in streaks of blood orange and shadow. The outlaw stepfather rode into town, boots striking the dusty streets with a menace that made shopkeepers shutter windows and children hide behind their mothers. His eyes burned with a fury sharpened by humiliation. She had escaped, and he would not forgive. Anger can turn a man into a storm, and tonight, that storm rode through the town, searching for its next victim. Every man who crossed him flinched. Every whisper told of his cruelty, and every shadow carried a threat. He slammed the saloon doors, a loud crash echoing through the wooden boards. Inside, a few gamblers froze mid-hand, watching his face twist with rage. "Where is she?" he barked, voice raw with whiskey and violence. "Where's that girl?" The townsfolk murmured, glances exchanged, but none dared answer. Fear hung thick, curling around them like smoke from the dying hearths. He had been a tyrant in her life, but now, exposed and furious, he prowled like a predator hunting a ghost. The world had seen his cruelty, yet no law had caught him, until tonight. The balance of power began to shift. Outside the town's edge, the rancher watched from the ridge, eyes narrowing beneath the brim of his hat. He could see the outlaw riding along the horizon, plotting, fuming. He tightened his grip on the reins, jaw set. He won't take her back. Not tonight, not ever again. Back at the ranch, the young woman sat near the cabin's window, hands wrapped around a steaming cup of water. She had heard the distant shouts and pounding hooves, her pulse rising with each barked command. She shivered, not from cold, but from the memory of rope and the terror that clung to her skin like a second layer. The stepfather's silhouette appeared briefly on the ridge, a dark figure framed by the dying sun. He shouted threats into the wind, his voice carrying, rough and jagged. "She's mine! You hear me? Mine!" And yet the world was not his alone. Shadows lengthened, but so did the light. Courage and resolve were quietly assembling on the ridge, ready to meet his fury. He turned, spurred by pride and rage, retreating into the darkness beyond town, muttering curses and planning his next strike. The night was coming, and with it a reckoning. But for now the rancher and the girl remained untouched, their fragile hope unbroken. This was the first confrontation, a test of wills. The villain had returned, but he would not claim victory, not yet. And in that tense, quiet moment, the seeds of justice began to take root. The sheriff's horse crunched along the ridge, hooves stirring dust that glittered in the fading sunset. He was a man worn by years and hardened by lawless men, but his eyes still carried the weight of justice, a calm certainty that evil could be held at bay, if only briefly. The rancher met him near the cabin, tense and ready, the girl clutching the edges of her blanket, fragile but alert. The law had arrived, not with pomp or parade, but with the quiet authority of experience. In the western lands, justice often walked slowly, but when it came, it carried the promise of protection and reprieve. The sheriff dismounted, leather creaking, spurs jingling softly. His gaze swept over the girl, bruised and pale, yet alive. He nodded once, firm and deliberate. "She's safe now." "Tell me what happened," he said, voice gravelly, steady. She swallowed hard, lips trembling, voice barely above a whisper. He tried to hang me," she said, shaking, eyes flicking toward the distant ridge where shadows lingered. I thought I'd die." The rancher's jaw tightened. "Not tonight. Not ever again. Truth, once spoken, has a power all its own." And in that small cabin, beneath the dying light of day, her words carried both accusation and hope. The sheriff listened, silent and weighing the gravity of the threat. The sheriff's hand rested on the grip of his revolver, a subtle reminder of authority and protection. "Men like him don't change," he said quietly. "They only return stronger if they think fear still binds you. But we'll be ready." Outside, the wind carried a faint scent of smoke and distant desert fire. The outlaw stepfather and his gang were planning their next move, unaware that law and courage had aligned against them. She looked at the sheriff, trembling, yet eyes sharp with the edge of survival. "Will he come back?" He met her gaze steadily. "If he does, he'll find more than a girl to frighten. He'll find justice." In that moment, the balance shifted. Fear still lingered, but so did resolve. The sheriff's presence was a beacon, a promise that the darkness stalking her was no longer invincible. And in her chest, hope began to grow, not loud, not certain, but present, ready to guide her through the night to come. The rancher placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone. Not tonight, not ever again." The first stars appeared overhead, tiny pinpricks in the desert sky, hinting that even in the vast wilderness, protection and courage had found their mark. The night pressed down like a blanket of smoke over the ranch. Lanterns flickered inside the cabin, casting long, trembling shadows that danced across the walls. Outside, hoofbeats echoed through the dry desert, a low, menacing rhythm that made her stomach twist in fear. The outlaw stepfather had returned, and this time, he was not alone. Evil gathers in numbers emboldened by darkness, and tonight, the wind carried more than whispers. It carried fire, chaos, and a promise of reckoning.